Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
So the first thing that I say to parents is that you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. That's a revelation for some parents because some parents think they have to manage everything.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the author of 6 books about raising happy families, here with Kylie, my wife, and mum to our 6 kids. Hey Kylie, a couple of weeks ago we had a conversation with Andrew Fuller, child and adolescent psychologist, author of 22 books. We talked about his book, The A-to-Z of Feelings.
It was such a great conversation.
Inspiring guy. We wanted to have another conversation with him, this time about managing tricky behaviours. He's got a book of the same name, Tricky Behaviours. And Andrew has kindly decided to join us again for this conversation about managing the people around us. Well, Andrew, is it even right to say that we're managing the people around us with their tricky behaviours? Is that an appropriate term, do you think?
Hi, Kylie. Hi, Justin. Well, trying to at least, I suppose. There are times when we need to, in families, de-escalate conflict and de-escalate issues. And so being able to calm disturbed waters or distressed behaviours is an important skill for any parent.
Yeah. I guess I always chafe at the idea of somebody managing me because autonomy is so important, but there does need to be some working with on this. So you've got a model in your book, Tricky Behaviours. So basically, it's important, I guess, to be able to have a family culture, maybe just to answer the management stuff. It's important to have a family culture where we can recover from upset and from distress. And so learning that these are temporary feelings rather than business as usual is pretty important. So I developed, beginning in my career in psychiatric crisis services, but basically a way of working with families to resolve that, unsurprisingly called R.E.S.O.L.V.E. And R.E.S.O.L.V.E is an acronym, and the first part is to respond with respect. So the first thing that I say to parents is that you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. And that's a revelation for some parents because some parents think they have to manage everything. And indeed they don't. Tricky kids particularly will give you lots of reasons to argue, but you don't have to argue with all of them. Sometimes it's worth just going, that's interesting, and move on. But there are other times when you want to basically respond rather than react. So it's not waiting until you've got a head of steam to match their head of steam. It's actually going, okay, I need to catch this fairly clearly and fairly quickly. So that's where the E.ngage comes in. So rather than waiting, because often one of the mistakes that I see parents make in families is that they hope that the behaviour will blow over. And generally, without some help, kids don't just allow the behaviour to blow over, particularly if it's an angry outburst or a tantrum or something like that. And so really it's probably better, rather than being back-footed, to be front-footed and to sort of say, you okay? You seem a bit out of sorts. You seem unhappy. What's happening? And I generally find that won't amplify the problem. In fact, it lessens it, having somebody who essentially is seeking out and understanding what's going on. Now, the next part of it, the S part of R.E.S.O.L.V.E, is seek understanding. Now, in this part, we really want to help parents to learn to understand what's behind the behaviour. So the aim of R.E.S.O.L.V.E is to make misbehaviour the abnormal state in a family, not the normal state. Because if misbehaviour is the normal state in the family, it's hell for everybody. It's chaos, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so you're basically trying to think about how you might change language. And so the most powerful question is what here? So what's going on for you? Are you okay? What's happening? Are you and we use an acronym of HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed. What's happening for you? You're not normally like this. What's going on? Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? Are you stressed? And so basically, whether you ask those things explicitly of a child or just think them will give you a kinder response as a parent. It's then about observing feelings. Now, anyone who's ever watched a child do a tantrum will know that it's like watching the surf roll, and there are peaks and there are troughs. And it's really fascinating to watch as kids basically go through those peaks and troughs. And every parent's observed a child who's basically getting to a trough and then they almost rev themselves up again. It's like they're going to surge back into a peak.
Yeah, usually it happens when you make eye contact with them.
Yeah, that's right. And so there are only very limited moments in which you can communicate anything effectively. And it's important to know that, because if you just try and talk your way right through this, it just amplifies the whole thing and worsens it.
So I just want to quickly jump in and do a quick summary, Andrew, because R.E.S.O.L.V.E, there's obviously, I can't count. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 7, thank you, 7 elements. And the first 4, the R is respond with respect. The E is engage.
Yep.
The S is that we seek understanding. We try to understand what's going on. The O is we observe their feelings.
That's right. Now the L is lower the tone. And here we
I like
get
that.
into the mysterious world of neurochemistry and behaviour. So we know that basically behind misbehaviour is a brain that's not functioning well. And behind a brain that's not functioning well is a neurochemical imbalance, and a balance of the neurochemicals in the brain. And so understanding as a parent those makes a gigantic difference. Now, there are 4 major ones that we try and help parents to get their heads around. 2 that we want more of, generally speaking, and 2 that we generally want less of. So the 2 we want less of are adrenaline and cortisol. Now, they're the stress hormones. So basically, these are, adrenaline works to make kids what I call chatty, ratty, and scatty. They're all over the place with their motor mouth, and they'll often talk at 1 million miles an hour. Cortisol does the reverse. It makes particularly teenagers monosyllabic. What? Don't know. All right. It's okay. And so being able to lower those down makes a gigantic difference. And one of the key things in families that lowers it down are repetitions and rituals. This is the way we do it. Which part of this don't you understand, Justin? I've got a whole life to help. It's going to be fun. We're going to get there eventually. And in our family, this is how we do it. I'm glad we've got that understood. That's excellent.
Well practiced. Well practiced.
The 2 that we generally like more of are dopamine, which is, of course, the driving neurochemical of motivation, and also serotonin, which is the most powerful antidepressant known to humankind. And that's through love, through feedback, through connection, and so on. And thinking about those makes a gigantic difference. The V in R.E.S.O.L.V.E is to value add. So just, simply being prepared at times to turn to your children and saying, how can I help? What can I do that's useful here? Because it's easy to spend a lot of your time doing things that aren't useful. And I think it's important to realise that sometimes some of the things that we've picked up on our journey of life are not always appropriate. For example, pep talks used to work with kids, but they don't anymore. And so basically giving them a pep talk might feel kind of sort of rewarding for the parent, but often is pretty boring for the child. And the E, the final part of R.E.S.O.L.V.E, so respond with respect, engage, seek understanding, observe feelings, lower the tone, value add, and then finally empower. And that's about thinking about what the long-term aim of this is. So it's not for parents to manage children's behaviour, but it's for children to learn how to manage their own behaviour. And so our long-term aim is to go through this process, and families will go through it time and time again until the child really knows how to do this for themselves somewhere around the age of 56 or so.
Fingers crossed. We're talking with Andrew Fuller, child and adolescent psychologist, the author of The A to Z of Feelings and Tricky Behaviours, among some of his 20-plus books. We're going to talk about this R.E.S.O.L.V.E idea in just a sec for managing tricky behaviours with 2 specific scenarios. Parents of toddlers who are melting down and parents of a teenager who is addicted to screens. That's coming up next on the Happy Families podcast.
It's the Happy Families podcast.
For a happier family, try a Happy Families membership, because a happy family doesn't just happen. Details at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're having a wonderful conversation again with Andrew Fuller.
Hey, Andrew, let's say I've got a toddler, really losing the plot. It's, 6:30 at night, already had dinner, belly full of food, had a bath, supposed to be going to bed, but my toddler decides, I don't want to go to bed. I've had enough. I'm cranky, I'm angry, and I'm going to scream the house down, let the whole neighbourhood know that my parents are awful people. How do we use your R.E.S.O.L.V.E model with a toddler who's having this moment and exhibiting these tricky behaviours?
Yeah, one of the problems with hanging around with toddlers is you can end up behaving like one yourself if you're not careful. So everyone in the family is having a tantrum. That's going to be really successful, isn't it? And so we need to recognise here that, in terms of brains, there are many ways of processing information, which we could talk about for yonks. But in terms of emotions, there are really only two major pathways. And one's driven by your amygdala, which kicks off that kind of fear response, agitation. And the other is basically your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland releasing oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone of love, connection, belonging, trust, friendship, all that kind of stuff, right? And so you have a choice at that moment when a child's tantruming, which way do you want to go? Now, many parents, of course, were parented through parenting and through the amygdala, right? If you do that, there'll be hell to pay. But really, that's bygone practices. That doesn't work anymore. And so here's your chance to help this child to learn a really important lesson in their lives, which is about how to soothe themselves long-term when they're distressed. And the way we all learn to do that is by being initially soothed. And that means that the role of parents is probably to swoop in, pick up possibly, comfort, say there's obviously something wrong. What's going on for you? Are you okay? I can see you distressed. What's happening? How about I read you a story as you quietly move towards the bedroom, holding them. But at the same time, it's the business, the main game is, as I said before with R.E.S.O.L.V.E, is to empower. So you're wanting that child down the track, and it will be a long way down the track, to learn how to do this for themselves when they're upset, because otherwise they won't be able to do it in their general life.
I love how you humanise our children and their emotions, Andrew. It's just, it's empowering as a parent to recognise and know that these little people and their emotions are just part of the human experience. But
Thanks, Kylie.
I'm wondering if you can help us resolve an issue with our teenager. We've got a teenager, they've got ADHD, suffer from anxiety, and we just can't get them off their screens. How do we work through resolving that challenge?
Well, most of the interventions that parents take to really try to get kids off screens just don't work. And so essentially, the first thing I think we've got to realise is that when a young person is playing a computer game, they're in a hypnotic trance. And so they're enchanted. I mean, computer games are incredibly brilliantly designed to entrance people. And so if you just jump into a room and say, right, get off your computer, it's time for bed, all that kind of stuff, basically they're going to respond incredibly negatively. So you're far better to sort of shuffle alongside them. I know you can't do this all the time, but at the same time, just to ask them, well, what's the game and how's it going and, what's happening in it and so on, which they won't like to have a conversation with you because they're absorbed in the game. But at least what you're doing is gently easing them out of this. Now, particularly for kids with attention problems, particularly ADHD, computer games are incredibly soothing. So they're even more, if you like, entrancing than they would be for, kids with just normal functioning. And so you've got to realise the power of this. So, of course, when you're a kid that has ADHD, the world is boring, really, really boring. And so what you're after is excitement. And guess where you can get that excitement? Computer games. And so what we need to do is to trade on computer games strongly. Computer games aren't bad. It's just basically there are other things to do in life. And so essentially what you have to do is earn your computer game time by doing preceding skills. Now, because computer games are designed so brilliantly to basically get dopamine peaks, dopamine's the neurochemical that relates to motivation, that once you've finished a computer game, basically you're lowered in levels of dopamine, which is why it's almost useless or pointless trying to get a teenager to do anything productive after they've had extensive screen time. And so what you've got to then go is, okay, in order to play computer games by all means, but before that you need to get the reading done or you need to get the homework done or whatever it is. So you're doing that trade-off all the time.
And that's it?
Yeah, because you see, you can't control this world. I think it's important to realise that. So maybe prior to 2020 you could get away with it a bit. But now, given that young people have had all of their schooling, all of their entertainment, and all of their social linkage through computers, you're never going to win this again. The world's changed. It's time to get real about this. So in 2019, people would say stuff like, well, what you should do is never meet a friend, that you never accept a friend online that you've never met face-to-face, and basically put the computer in the dining room. And, you know, this is just archaic stuff. Kids will laugh in your face if you suggest these things as absolutely ridiculous because the world's moved on. And so the world is computer-based now, and social interactions are also computer-based. So a kid, if you said, well, I want you to shut down your computer and I want you to go outside and play, most kids would probably say, so you're actually wanting me to go and have and contract something that might kill me. Is that what you want me to do?
That's right. But what I hear in both those examples, either with the toddler or with the child on the computer, on the screen, is I can hear the resolve coming out really clearly. The responding with respect, the engaging with the child, and even a bit with the emotional state that they're in. This idea that we're seeking understanding, we're trying to get what's going on in their world, observing their feelings, lowering the tone. I mean, just listening to you, seriously, Kylie mentioned it based on our last conversation, but I'm sitting here listening and I'm like, yeah, you're just easy to listen to and you've brought my tone down. I feel like I'm calm and I'm waiting for the big bang to happen somewhere because everything's so calm. But then there's the value add and the empower. And this idea, okay, well, let's figure this out together. What's going to happen next? What are we going to do now? The model is really simple. It ties in a lot with my 3 E's of effective discipline.
Yeah, it does. But what I love about it is for the inexperienced person, you kind of look at this big long list and it feels like, okay, step 1, I've got to do this. Step 2, I've got to do this, you know, and you're kind of working your way through it. But as I listened to Andrew, it kind of wasn't about steps. It's really about, you know, the way we respond to our kids holistically, as opposed to there's a step 1 and now there's a step 2. You know, it just kind of everything merged into each other as he worked through it.
Well, Andrew, what I really like about the R.E.S.O.L.V.E model that you've shared with us is that it's been forged in the fires of some of the most serious clinical, psychological challenges that people can face, right? I mean, you did this in a really intense environment.
Yeah, I'd be sitting on bridges with people who are in gloomy moments in the darkest hours of their lives and, forging this idea really of how do you stop people getting to that point, which has really been the hallmark of my career. How do you stop people getting to those points in their lives? And most of us, to be honest, I think don't know how to resolve. When relationships go wrong, when life goes wrong, we often are a bit stuck. We don't know quite what to do. I mean, for example, quite often with young people, when they have a bad day, they don't know that tomorrow can be different. I know this sounds a bit astonishing to say, but quite often in my therapy room, I'll say to teenagers particularly, you know, if you do today exactly what you did yesterday and expect it to feel different, I don't think it's going to work. And they look at me as if somehow I've said something very revolutionary because they've never really thought about it. And even though it's so obvious, sometimes we don't think about these things.
Well, the book is called Tricky Behaviours. Andrew Fuller is the author, one of Australia's best known and loved child and adolescent psychologists. And Andrew, we've had a wonderful conversation with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a delight, Justin and Kylie. Thanks so much.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, check out our Happy Families membership. Pay a small monthly fee and get loads of support for your family to help your family to resolve many of the challenges that they've got. I can't wait to share Andrew's ideas with the Happy Families community a little bit more. I think there's some really strong ideas. For more info, you can go to happyfamilies.com.au and make sure you check out Andrew's books, The A-Z of Feelings and Tricky Behaviours. You can find them online and in bookstores everywhere.